Scott, thank you so much for joining us. This is a super exciting episode. Glad to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Nadia.
Absolutely. I am one of your loyal readers for the State of the MarTech report. I think for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been following it like every spring when it comes out. I know it's that time to start reading. And a little fun fact this spring, when it came out, and the report is 140 pages, you guys do a very thorough job. Um, I took it to a baseball game, and this is me at the baseball game. It was one of those low scoring games, and my boys are huge baseball fans, and I just have to be exposed to it. So they called me the baseball heretic, but that demonstrates my love towards the findings that you present.
I'm honored. I am honored. I'm glad we didn't strike out.
No, no, it's a great report, no pun intended, great report. And when I read it, like, what I want to start with, you kind of set the stage within MarTech. You said there's a lot of AI hype, a lot of AI churn, expanding stacks, some ABM category decline, and you characterize this as the year of unicorns, sparkles, trolls, and ponies. With ponies being AI generated herd of nuggets of gold hiding in a pile of proverbial horse manure. I love that metaphor. I think it's so accurate. So maybe could we start with like grounding ourselves in like what do you see now as the year progresses? Kind of elaborate on that metaphor that you offered.
Yeah, well, I mean, anyone who's been in the tech space for their career is familiar with Gartner's hype cycle. Like we live by the hype cycle. But one of the things that's been fascinating over the past few decades is the hype cycle keeps shrinking in its timeline, right? I mean, like 20 years ago, like, oh, well, we'll start out with a little trigger and then it'll take a year or two for the hype to peak and then it'll be a trough. And, it'd be like sort of a 5 or 10 year journey, to go from like, yeah, the initial idea to like, oh, yeah, okay, we've kind of figured this out. Here's where reality sits. And steadily, year over year, it just kept shrinking the timeline for that to the point now with so much of the stuff that happens in AI is things get released, the hype enters like an absolute fury, in a matter of weeks, and then also typically like within a month or two, people are already pushing back and saying, yeah, but it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that other thing. And then those things actually start to get fixed. And like it gets to the point where you like look over like a 12-month, 18-month period where you go through the entire hype cycle. And while this is, fascinating when you're just sort of like stepping back and observing it, when you're actually living this, when you're a business owner or an entrepreneur or someone who's basically, living or dying, by the evolution of these things, oh man, it's exciting, but it is exhausting as hell.
It is exhausting. I've never been on the MarTech side of things. I've always been on the brand side of things, and I am living the life, and it's definitely a fast ride.
It is. And again, it's kind of unprecedented. I mean, I hate to be part of the hype by saying that, but just the reality is the speed of change. And what's interesting about so much of these AI technologies is they're not particularly localized to just, oh, this particular use case for this particular industry, or, they just have such broad applicability to so many different things throughout all kinds of industries and professions. And they're evolving so quickly that, yeah, there just is no precedent in history for how we as a society, much less, like individual, businesses and individual, professionals, like, how do we navigate this? How do we adapt to it? So we're kind of all figuring it out as we go here for the first time.
Building the plane as we're flying it. So let me show this slide to our audience. This is the TLDR version of your report, and we'll put the link to the report. This is state of your stack survey that you shared earlier. Out of everything here, what stood out to you the most?
Oh, well, let's see here. I'd say, you know, one of the things that's interesting here is just how much debate there has been over the size of the MarTech stack. Right? I mean, we've been been looking at MarTech here for like 17 years. I would say one of the perennial themes, that's just been constant is, oh yeah, we have too many tools. We've got to consolidate, our tech stack. And there's nothing wrong with that as a motivation. But empirically, generally speaking, tech stacks have just continued to grow, not shrink. And what we're actually seeing with these past couple years with AI, they've actually grown even more, just because there are so many new tools and companies are having to experiment and pilot with so many new different capabilities. And so this causes a fair amount of consternation. But I think I have a bit of a counter opinion of this, which is, don't get me wrong, you want a rationalized MarTech stack. Like you want as few tools as you need to get your job done. But to me, like, the count of the number of tools is almost irrelevant in some ways. I mean, a lot of this just comes down to like, okay, what are the capabilities that you need? And what's the easiest and best way for you to get them? And if you can do that with one tool, or you do it with 5 tools, as long as it's the easiest and most effective way for you, wherever you sit in that continuum, that's a perfectly good thing. And so I always have found like these, evaluations where people think about, the utilization of the MarTech stack. Gartner has this very famous instrument they release, every year of, hey, how much utilization are you getting out of your MarTech stack? And, it started at like 60% 4 or 5 years ago, and then it dropped at 50 and 40 and 30. But again, it always struck me as like, well, is utilization, at least being framed that way, really what matters? Because really, like, does it matter if I use a tool once a month or like every hour of the day? Well, it kind of depends on what the tool does. If it does something that I use it once a month, but the thing I use it for is incredibly important to me, and when I use it for that thing and I get what I want, it has a great impact, on business outcome, that's a great success. And so I don't know, this most recent report where we just got more data of what people are doing with their MarTech stacks in AI. I think the fact that tech stacks have expanded a bit is actually something that's like actually okay. It's probably what we should be doing in this world of AI, where we need to actually be experimenting and trying a lot of these new tools to just even learn what's possible.
We see a lot of questions about tech stacks at CaliberMind. I mean, we're in the area of marketing analytics and go-to-market intelligence. And on average, from what we have seen, is 15 to 17 is what people have today. And one of the things that stood out to me on your report, the one that was released earlier this spring, this past spring, was the ABM category shrinking. It was one of those highest categories that saw a decline, 10%. Against other categories. And I was super curious because I've been running ABM for over a decade, ever since it became a thing in the early 2010s. Is it the technology that's going away and there's going to be something different? Or is it that other tools offer the capabilities that huge ABM behemoths were offering, and now they're expensive and you can do the same with something else that's cheaper? Like, what's your take on that? I'm super curious about ABM.
Yeah, it's funny. I think there's a lot of things like this in MarTech where we sometimes conflate a approach or a capability or a strategy with a tool. Because, yeah, I mean, ABM is a great example of this. There were a set of tools that were very specifically ABM tools, and they were the early advocates of like an ABM approach. How do you rethink the way in which marketing and sales work together, in B2B to really be effective with this, which was incredibly useful. But so are people, basically conflated like, oh yeah, well, I have an ABM tool, so I'm doing the ABM strategy. But in reality, the ABM strategies, ultimately just sort of got baked into the entire, marketing operating system. And you're right, then a lot of different tools that weren't necessarily dedicated ABM tools provided more and more of the capabilities that people would apply towards ABM. And the boundaries of ABM, started to get a bit fuzzy too, right? I mean, you've got a number of things that have been very focused on like the data component of that that sometimes gets overlaid with what is also called like the sales intelligence space. There's the whole intent data providers. I mean, there's just basically all these different categories that sort of blend together. So the fact that the number of like dedicated ABM tools, at least as we had framed them in that ABM category on the landscape, that it shrunk a little bit. Take that as actually a significant decline, and certainly not in ABM like practices. We see, yeah, I mean, that is just widely embedded in the B2B, marketing operating system today. But maybe a little bit of overlap between now different tools and different ways of getting some of those capabilities. Um, so that'd be my take.
Yeah. Another interesting thing to me that stood out in the report is kind of evolution, not just within the tech stack, but evolution within the marketing teams, the marketing operations teams that administer tech stacks. And how, with the advent of AI and kind of, democratization and availability of AI across not just different organizations, but also within different tools, the scope of marketing operations teams has been shifting from basic tasks more towards marketing analytics and being data stewards and helping people with kind of production side of things. And this chart from your report kind of illustrates that great shift. Could you speak to that? It was super interesting to me, this evolution.
Yeah, well, I think, this past year in particular, many people, but marketers included, I think started to have some genuine fear about like, well, wait a second, AI is getting pretty good at doing a whole bunch of these things. Like, is AI going to take my job? And people sometimes reply, well, it's not that AI is going to take your job. It's someone who uses AI, is going to take your job. But that's a little bit facetious there because, like, yeah, I mean, the reality is there's a set of jobs and tasks primarily in that core bucket of just like production work and like manual analytical work. That yeah, AI is dramatically shrinking the amount of time and resources required to do that sort of production analysis, which is a really great thing. But it's interesting because you might say that companies would be like, oh, okay, well, if we can do this marketing production analysis and we can do it, in 80% less time than we did before, then we should just get rid of 80% of the marketing team and call it a day. But the problem with that thinking is this efficiency gain is not unique to you. Every single company on the planet is going to get the benefit of this efficiency gain on the production analysis side of marketing. So how are you going to compete? It's not going to be by being more efficient in production analysis. It's got to be like, okay, now that we've gained this efficiency and we have the opportunity to reallocate talent and resources, where can we reallocate it that is actually going to give us a competitive advantage? And to me, there's two other sides of that spectrum. There's like certainly investing in creative, like marketers who now have this ability to bring to life new ideas and new experiments and like really, push the innovation of how they find and engage and delight customers. Yes, leverage these tools, leverage that production efficiency to be able to dramatically expand the experimental landscape in which you're operating. And then the other side of that is the marketing ops and marketing tech folks who, let's be honest, marketing ops has not often gotten the recognition or the resourcing that it really deserves. I mean, I'm biased being a MarTech person, but because it's been so much of the back office mechanics of it, it hasn't always received the spotlight, for like, oh, this is what is really driving impact for the marketing organization, for the business overall. But now, with all this stuff happening with AI, it turns out like the only way you really do get those efficiencies in production analysis is if your underlying infrastructure, your underlying data, the way in which your tech stack works, the way in which your operational processes are set up in a way that allow them to be automated and augmented. That actually becomes a competitive advantage of how good your tech and operations are to support this. And so I think we are starting to see like, yeah, marketing ops is entering a little bit of a golden age where they are finally like really being recognized as the strategic differentiator that they kind of always have been. But now in the world of AI, it's like just, yeah, you have no choice. It's marketing ops has to be great or you're not getting what you want out of AI.
I actually have a hiring philosophy when it comes to all the different functions within the department. When, scale ups or startups or scale ups, bring their first marketing leader, the question is like, who are you going to hire first? What IC are you going to hire first? I've always went for marketing ops because in my mind, it doesn't matter if you have a demand gen person who is spinning up all this wonderful stuff, or you have a creative person who is doing amazing graphics. Like, if none of that goes past the point of collection and nobody else in the business is enabled, empowered, given the data and the insights to do the next thing, that last mile makes it or breaks it. In most cases, it breaks it. So I think that the spotlight on the MarOps teams kind of going into the next year, it's near and dear to my heart because I just don't think we're going away from the complexities that now became the domain of easy fix it with AI.
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, I'm also just laughing because one of the people who's worked with me at HubSpot, in the partner program and developing that ecosystem, a woman by the name of Kelly Sarabin, who's an absolute genius when it comes to all things partnerships. That's actually her philosophy on the partnership side is get a good partner ops person. Like if you don't have that sort of foundation. So yeah, your wisdom there resonates with me as something, yeah, it's
Well,
very
it's
true.
like Eisenhower, right? He figured, okay, we need the infrastructure before we do anything. Like, how are we gonna get to from point A to point B?
It's the
One.
horse
Oh,
before the
go ahead.
cart. A good idea.
Yes, 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 very much so. Speaking about kind of more and more AI front and center and the replacements, like we've just heard the sad news about Microsoft laying off, thousands of people trying to replace certain functionalities with efficiencies through AI. Other big companies have done similar things. And what comes to mind to me is the research that Anthropic did recently, and I will bring up the slide and we'll put the link for people in the chat. It was this research where they ran an experiment with Claude. And they created a vending machine that was completely powered by Claude, and it was a computer in a physical office. And anybody could buy anything or procure anything from this vending machine, where Claude was given pretend startup capital, and he would have to go and purchase, or it would have to go and purchase things that from the supply chain and figure out all of the procurement and logistics. And the results of this experiment were, I don't want to say catastrophic, but they were lackluster because the decisions that Claude was making, or machine powered by Claude, did not really provide the rationale, that kind of savviness that you would expect from a knowledgeable procurement organization with critical reasoning, right? And to me, this is interesting, like this narrative of blind replacement of all of the critical thinking and kind of the complex logical tasks with AI, when in reality, and I love that the Anthropic CEO is like open about it, right? He spoke to
Yeah.
Anderson Cooper about the ethical implications and all of this. But I'm curious about your take. Like, we have physical evidence that the future is not here yet. However, the word on the street, and in my LinkedIn echo chamber for sure, is that it's here to replace us all tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think it comes down to the reality. 100% right that when you think about like the actual creative, strategic, complex process, people manage, like all these things that AI is not in a position to do, and you need people, and you need good people, savvy people, smart people, dedicated people to actually be able to do. What AI is today very good at is replacing a set of manual tasks either replacing them or dramatically changing the efficiency curve on them, so that, yeah, something that, might have taken me a day to do manually, I can like now request of, my AI systems, and it does it for me in a minute. And so what's interesting is you are now seeing churn, among professionals, where I mean, I was a little bit flippant earlier with the comment about you won't be replaced by AI, you'll be replaced by people who are good at using AI. That is actually starting to happen. And you're seeing more and more of these stories about, albeit being anecdotal, of people being like, okay, listen, you need to either be figuring out how to use these tools to be more effective and more efficient, or we're going to let you go and we're going to find someone who is actually able to like lean into this and take advantage of this. And so I think that shuffle is real, and I think it's, I don't know. I mean, like, again, we started off by saying just how unprecedented the speed of this change was. I have enormous empathy for pretty much everyone who's trying to go through this process of just having to learn at a speed that, yeah, we just have never had to learn, this much, this fast, and to do it in an environment where, because of the sort of competitive pressures on businesses, they're like, yeah, you really do need to learn this, and if you're not going to learn it, we're going to get someone who has learned it or is able to learn it. That's not a comfortable place for people to be in.
I think in part it's also, even using my own example, right? Like, how does it feel? There's so much vaporware out there. I feel like, last year there was more because whoever could cobble something together in their basement surely did and monetized it, right? And then the churn happened. And now there's more and more tools that promise the wonderful outcome that we all want. They're not quite there yet. And yet you waste time, you invest your hours, and you realize that once you signed up and got all in and created your first deck, it still looks like a synthetic deck. It's not on brand. The fonts are not right, and all of those things, right? So it's like this notion of AI hacks, like we all try them, the little thing over here, the little thing over there, but the holistic process is not there yet. So do you think next year is the year when we will see more kind of end to end AI enablement for certain things, or will it still be very much ad hoc? You have to cobble something together, and in a lot of cases, it sits within the marketing department
Mm,
because marketing is closer to AI than many other departments.
yeah. Um, I was just thinking about that like MIT report that came out recently. Everyone's been citing that, the research they've done is like something like 95% of the enterprises who have been experimenting, with these generative AI technologies, claim that they actually haven't seen, return on investment there. So there's definitely a gap between the hype and the reality. I think the way I find it so interesting is I'm a big fan of Ethan Mollick, right? Who is sort of like one of the voices of, like, okay, well, what's actually happening here? What are we seeing, in the latest research? But also like the practical use cases, And he's for many years here talked about this as being a jagged frontier, where, for a given model, like a GPT-5 or whatnot here, it can do some things that are absolutely amazing. In fact, even some things that you might think of as being really hard, and like it's able to do them incredibly well and very easy. And then you're like, oh, well, if you can do that, surely you could do this other simple thing. And it just totally fails on that. And this is what makes it so challenging, is it is very hard to have like a linear extrapolation of how you use AI right now. It is incredibly use case dependent. And there is still a fair amount of variance of how proficient you are at doing the right sort of prompting, or what all the cool kids are now calling context engineering, of like, how do you make
I
sure you
never
provide
heard
the right
that one.
data and the right instructions and all this, because that can dramatically change the outcome. And I've seen this like firsthand, like people who take a very naive approach to using these tools, where they almost treat it like a glorified version of Google, where, okay, I just ask a simple question, I just give a simple statement. Can it do it? Can it not do that? most of the time it doesn't really do anything all that impressive. And then you see people who actually think very carefully about, like, okay, I've got this really clear prompt. I'm saying this is the persona to use, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, this is the format, I want to see this in, here's the data sources to turn to. Folks who are actually really good at doing that prompt engineering or context engineering, like, the results they get are dramatically different. And so it just makes it all this makes it very difficult between the jagged frontier and then there being just so much variation in the skill of the people who are wielding these tools. Yeah, I don't know what my point there is, other than I think it's actually very hard to say, like, hey, is this AI stuff actually usable in real today? It depends on what you're using it for, and it depends on how good you are at using it for that. Will that change dramatically in the next year, that it'll be just easy for anyone to do anything? I don't know. I suspect not. I suspect we
Yeah,
still got
that
quite a while where, like, yeah, the frontier is going to remain jagged, and the proficiency of the individuals, operating and wielding these things is going to be a really big factor in how effective the outcomes are.
yeah, our crystal ball got a little bit foggy there. There's no telling. We'll see. One thing that also stands out to me when it comes to usage within the area of analytics and data and kind of, that marketing use case where we do have a lot of data, it's everywhere. Wouldn't it be nice if AI could summarize, thin it down, run some mathematical analyses on what we have and give us the answer, the easy button, right? And within CaliberMind, we talk about analytics a lot. We deal with data where we sit on the marketing data warehouse where we ingest that data. So, it's modeled, it's ready to go. AI has a clear path to extract certain things within the guardrails. But what I also noticed is that there are a lot of what I call black box AI systems where it does something, it spits something out, and it kind of looks directionally right, but you don't have the ability to lift the covers and see what's under the hood, understand
Mm,
data lineage, double click into that QA. And what I've seen recently was a stat very similar to what you were talking about from MIT on like this disillusionment is within coding, where the notion was that it actually doesn't improve productivity by 35 to 40%, what McKinsey cited. It actually decreases it by 18 to 19% because of the QA that's involved. It might increase it up front where you generate things faster. But to productize it, you have to QA, you have to, rework, you have to fix the bugs. And that's what sets us back. So what's your take on this kind of black box AI without trust but verify?
yeah. Okay. Well, there's, again, a couple things entangled there. The black box component is one aspect of this, and I'm with you. Yeah. Nobody wants this to be a black box. And I think one of the things that you've seen now with, like, the latest versions of Claude and ChatGPT, particularly when you're using them for things like deep research or whatnot, like, you can actually ask it, like, hey, listen, I need to understand your sources. I need to understand your thinking. Like, walk me through this. What were the steps you did? And I can provide that, which is very useful to then be able to double check that. I think, again, this thing about, like, the jagged frontier of just use cases matter. So, like, one example, oh, hang in here, I'm getting a little fuzzy. Let me try, see if this comes on back. There we go.
There you
Yeah, yeah, the crystal ball was fuzzy, and so, yeah, I got fuzzy. I'll give you one example. So, my daughter's rising senior in high school. We're in the process of visiting colleges and, figuring out application stuff. And so we just did a tour of a bunch of colleges in California, and, like, all the UC, University of California system schools, they have their own particular way in which they calculate GPAs versus on this sort of stuff, and what counts. And it's like they have categories of A through G. It's some whole complicated crap, And so, like, I could have, like, sat through and figured this out over, like, hours and hours, or I basically just pointed ChatGPT and I'm like, go get all this information. Here's the sites, in the University of California. Here are transcripts. Go ahead and do the calculations. And it does them. And it does it in a way that, like, okay, I need to see, like, what was each of the translations you did, because I want to double check that. There was actually a mistake in one of the things. I was able to see, like, oh, but in the end, what would have taken 4, 5, 6 hours, of manual slogging, and still might have not actually been accurate because I might have made all sorts of human mistakes, as we humans are prone to do. It's literally something that I was able to put together in like 5 minutes, and then I did a quick double check of it and, fixed one thing. And then the whole thing was done in 10 minutes. I'm like, okay, I mean, that is an actual real like success of this. Now, does that translate into, a software engineer, using a particular tool of, do they actually get 35% productivity on everything they do? I don't know. I think it depends a lot on the use case. And I would say one thing, by the way, on that MIT report is like when you dig into it, it's a very qualitative report and it's a very small sample size. And so again, that's not to say it's wrong. It's just, I think in this environment where we've got that jagged frontier of the success rate or failure rate of these things, has a really high variance right now. It's just hard to say. I'm sure there are companies and there are people who are getting a lot of great benefit out of this. And there's a whole bunch of people yet who aren't seeing the impact. And this is what makes it so challenging right now is, there's not a standard answer that we can just say like, oh yeah, this is the playbook, this is the outcome, do this, you're guaranteed, do X, you're guaranteed Y. It is a lot of trial and error in your specific circumstances.
And these are tough questions. I want to give it to you. Like these are tough questions to answer them. I mean, there's so much data out there, and aha moments happen every day. Somebody else released something. This is the new stat. One thing that I empathize with you with is the college application process. My daughter is a junior, so I will be following your footsteps next year. It's good to know that I can play with the transcripts and put them into something. Jim and I will chat. We will see. But that's actually a good practical tip that I'm going to take home from this.
It's the jagged frontier. As it turns out, like helping with college applications, it's a perfect use case.
I mean, it used to be big business, right? Everybody had the tutoring hack and a model, but I wonder if that's something that's getting cannibalized, but that's kind of outside of our scope. Um, we talked about data, and I want to kind of dive deeper into the world of data as, something that used to be extremely hot. Then it became commoditized. They're not interesting, staples, boring. Now data is back front and center. In your report, I saw it as one of the categories that experienced the most growth. I think we're just generating more data. Now we have to do something with it. We did not fix the data volume problem with generating more data. But the slide that I want to show from your report, it's this slide right here, where you talked about data integration being one of those hardest things that people reported. And of course, you have budget constraints, and now we go into the skilled workforce challenge. And then the fact that things are moving so fast, like all of this to me is essentially the summary of everything that you just mentioned. But I'm curious on your take whether or not we're moving kind of towards the light at the end of the tunnel going into next year with all of these challenges, or if you think they will continue.
Yeah, I think all of these challenges are going to continue for quite some time, just being honest. Like if we just go left to right through this, data integration, one of the things that it's interesting. There's this thing called the theory of constraints. Like where you basically for like something that you want to accomplish, you figure out like, okay, well, where is the bottleneck? And then you fix that bottleneck. But inevitably, when you fix that bottleneck, what ends up happening is further down the chain, you find what the next bottleneck is. And so one of the bottlenecks for us was like, oh, well, we don't actually get the data in one place. We have to do all this like really complicated integration point to point sort of stuff. Well, as we started to move to things like cloud data warehouses, that constraint started to get released a bit here where, okay, well, actually all the data is starting to converge into the cloud data warehouse. But then we realized, well, the next constraint is like, actually all of the data has some other problems, which is like, the way this team and this department was defining this data doesn't actually line up with how this other team has done this. And like, what's the way we think about that? So now with the data integration challenges, and this is a little bit of what Jonathan Moran was talking about in that, quote you've got there, is like, okay, well, who actually understands this data and can help manage the catalog and the mapping? I think one of the things that's exciting here with the MCP, the Model Context Protocol, and with these AI models, is it's enabling them to have a more standardized way to integrate with other data sources and services. Again, that's eliminating a bit of a constraint of like, oh, well, we don't need to learn necessarily a specific API, as long as we've got an MCP client and we can connect to an MCP server, that's very standardized. So that constraint gets relieved a little bit. But now we still have the problem of like, well, okay, like, well, what is the actual data that we're getting from the source and how do we interpret it? And so, well, I think there's a lot of improvements that have been happening in data integration, a lot of improvements. We still have a really long way to go to get to a place where data is something we can just take for granted. Like we'll always have the right data and we can always put it in the right context and it just always works for us. We're not there. We're not going to be there next year. I don't think we're going to be there this decade. I think that is a really long mission, but we'll keep getting better at it. Budget constraints, they've been around forever. I suspect budget constraints are, going to be around for eternity. Lack of skilled resources, kind of a variation on the budget constraint. I suspect actually, again, just given all the learning that people have to do, it's going to get harder and harder to find people who have all that knowledge and that experience. So I think it's going to get harder, not easier. Pace of change, well, I mean, that sort of sums up, our entire episode here. That's not getting easier anytime soon. In fact, if anything, the pace of change does seem to be accelerating. Tool complexity, there is some optimism here that this new user interface of being able to just conversationally engage with tools and have them understand our natural language and then do the commands we want, rather than us necessarily having to like, figure out this maze of, menu options and screen configs and which, sliders do I put for this tile. I do think there are some reasons why our ability to interface with these technologies may feel a little less complex. But I actually think the underlying technology, given the rate at which it's advancing, is the actual underlying technology is probably going to get more complex, not less so. So anyways, all that's to say, I'm not sure this probably isn't a very encouraging report of saying like, yeah, all those challenges, I think they're probably all going to get a little bit worse. Sorry.
You said something interesting, this expectation, which grew overnight, to interact with tools through that natural language interface that we all have in ChatGPT or Gemini. And the interesting thing, like within CaliberMind for us, we have what we internally call vibe dashboarding capabilities, right? For people to interact with their data and create the dashboard that has exactly what they need, not more and not less, and make it unique for different roles where they see things that are relevant to them without all of the bottlenecks of opening a ticket and waiting on another team, like all of those challenges, right? And I wonder if that's the expectation that people will apply to any MarTech tool. Like it will become table stakes to have that AI component that you can interact with the tool and get what you need. What's
Yeah, I think
your
you're
take on
right.
that?
I think it is going to be an expectation of pretty much every tool. And again, this is one of the things I am actually most excited about, is because even the example you were talking about here with, Vibe dashboarding, what a wonderful thing. It's like we've had all this incredible data, all this powerful technology, but yeah, going back to that theory of constraints, for us to actually be able to use it, has just generally had these barriers of, oh, well, you have to have someone who like really learns all the ins and outs of this particular tools and knows exactly which incantations to do to make that happen. And, that's a constraint. That's a bottleneck on this. And we are for a lot of use cases, not all, but for a lot of them, like we're really loosening that constraint and being in a position where, like, yeah, if you can describe what you want, at least in certain contexts, I think dashboards are a great example of that. Like, yeah, software can do, you tell it what you want and it can do it for you. Wow, what a wonderful thing. Um,
It actually makes me sad because way before Tableau was acquired by Salesforce, I thought Tableau was the best thing on the planet. I went through all of the Tableau certification courses. They used to do them, like they used to travel around the country and they would do them in your local areas and they cost an arm and a leg. And my employer, I mean, different employers would sponsor me to go and get the next level and the next level. And I loved it. I felt like I had that very unique, special short path to making wonders happen for people. Nobody else knew it, nobody else could understand. So I felt very, very valuable. That's the classic example of the bottleneck. And then I would leave the organization, and those dashboards never went anywhere. They got frozen.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is true. So it's again one of these things where, like, when you were one of those people who was at the bottleneck, like, yeah, I mean, the like standard economics of supply and demand, limited supply, tremendous demand. Yeah, a very good place to be in just as an individual professional. And so, yeah, this is one of these cases where, okay, AI is shifting that, that profession of people who, like, all they were particularly good at was understanding the incantations for like a tool like Tableau. That's not going to be the moat for individual professionals. Now, again, like, good news is I think there are now plenty of other constraints that now move beyond that. It still comes down to, more than anything, like the strategic thinking, the operational savvy, frankly, in many cases, the imagination that people are willing to bring to these things, because so many of these other constraints are being loosened. This ability to really take full advantage of, like, higher level strategic thinking, or a greater imagination of, like, what's possible. I wonder how we could connect these things, or could we make this happen? That is the new moat. That's a pretty exciting one.
I think it is exciting too. I want to take one more question, kind of, close on this big elephant in the room, what all of this change means for marketing leadership and what it means for maybe, marketing operations professionals that live the life of MarTech stack, the evolution that continues on and what their career progression looks like. Because, I get that question a lot. I mean, I talk to a lot of mid-level managers trying to figure out, like, how do I progress in my career? What does the future look like? And when I look at marketing leaders, it's almost like the yesteryear leaders would come through the lines of brand specialties, right? Brand, communications, product marketing, super, super central areas of marketing up until the latest and greatest developments right now. And right now, I feel like it's pivoting more towards understanding technology, data savviness, data affinities, like ability to kind of exercise the STEM part of your brain. Not everybody is wired the same, but it seems like it has become this unspoken requirement for a marketing leader to have those abilities, those skill sets, because in many organizations, marketing leads adoption of AI or integration of AI. Like, what's your take on this shift within what marketing leadership looks like?
Yeah. It does feel like it is the golden age of opportunity for the marketing operations career professional. I mean, to date, again, it hasn't been universal here, but in a lot of cases, right, you've seen, like, CMOs sort of come from, yeah, more of that brand or demand side of things. And then if they're smart, they hire a very good right-hand person, to be their ops and tech person. Um, it's you now sort of see, like, okay, as more and more of the differentiation for how marketing performs is based on these, like, operational capabilities, these technology capabilities, these data driven capabilities. Yeah, not inconceivable that you're going to see more and more CMOs who basically came from the operations and tech side of the house, and then they get someone as their right hand who's, like, yeah, particularly good at, like, driving the creative and driving the brand. I I think that's a very I'd say reasonable outcome, but I'd actually say I suspect it's a very likely outcome. Is there's no going back here from marketing. What was it? Mike Volpe, who was the original CMO of HubSpot, like I don't know, a decade or more ago, said something about like, marketing used to be like the arts and crafts department,
I've heard that.
and yeah, it just wasn't. It didn't get a lot of respect, in the C-suite and the boardroom because of that. They're like, hey, you guys go do the pretty pictures, and if
Yeah,
there needs to
the
be
kids' table is over there.
yeah, if there needs to be a cocktail hour at the event, we trust you to be able to handle that well. To now something where like, yeah, I mean, marketing really is for so many organizations, it is becoming the front line of all of this digital interaction and data with customers. They are like the conduit, to the customers and through them understanding the market, and actually now being able to leverage these AI tools to actually harness that, drive that. And that's serious things. I mean, this is like, marketing. Marketing came very close to being the top of the pyramid, with these capabilities. And I think there's relatively few other professions that have now the span of customer insight, technological data savvy, sort of creative differentiation and storytelling that is still important, in this context. The ability to blend all these things together, it's hard as hell, but those who can achieve that, or those who can build teams that can collectively achieve that, it's an incredible superpower.
I think that's why they call marketing the most dynamic function in the C suite because no other function manages the span of individual contributors that is so different from data to tools to creative to copywriting. Like, think about all of the different personalities and approaches to work. Like, no other department does that, but you're right. It's that ability to be the conduit of bringing the team together, which I think will separate those who actually do it well and leverage it well versus those who just fall apart. That's my take.
Yeah, I sort of have this picture in my head. I have to try and draw this up at some point where it's like, all right, you have people in finance who understand finance, and you have people in like, engineering and IT who understand like code and building apps, and you have people in operations who have to understand these processes. Marketing has now become something where like, okay, well, you need, of course, all the, creative, you need to understand the customer. Yes, you're going to have to understand the code. You're going to have to understand how to have like a financial model that like applies to that. Yeah, you're going to have these operational processes. It's literally, like all these other functions, you start to look at them and feel like, wow, they are very, in many ways compared to marketing, very narrow, compared to like marketing, you've like got to have this whole thing. And so maybe we shouldn't just be talking about, who becomes the next CMO, marketing ops, marketing tech people. I think we should be thinking about like, boy, a lot of the next generation of CEOs are going to come from the CMO's chair because the CMO is going to have a better understanding of all of these different dynamics of how they work together than pretty much any leader from any other specialized function.
Wow, that's amazing. You took it all the way to the next planet using the metaphor of this event and the theme of this event all the way to another galaxy, actually. I was aiming for the CMO. You're talking CEO and company leadership. That's exciting. Well, let me ask you one last question for us to close on. If we were trying to predict 2026 in, I don't know, one sentence, one paragraph, something that strikes you as that will be the it thing, what do you think it'll be? Well, the people or processes, whatever that could be.
I think the thing that is going to be the most transformative, disruptive thing to happen, and I think it will happen in 2026, is AI agents being run by the customers. Like so much of what we're doing right now is focused on AI and AI agents being run by the brands, by the companies, from the seller's perspective. Lots of interesting things happening there. I think we're going to start to see more and more. It's actually going to be the buyers who have their own AI operating an agency on their behalf that they're going to set loose and say, like, you deal with all my email for this. You go out, you do these websites, you attend these webinars, you figure out these are the things I'm interested in. You go figure it out for me. And that marketers in 2026 and beyond are going to have to think not just about like, oh, how do we win over the humans that we're engaging with? How do we win over the agents operating on behalf of all of these humans? It's going to be an incredibly large and diverse new constituency for marketing. So that ought to be fun.
We almost need a whole nother episode just on that. But I will tell you, we had someone who told us that their AI bot came and attended one of our webinars. And then the person, based on the findings of the AI bot, reached out and asked the questions that he had to ask, which to me was just a little bit of a surreal experience. But hearing that from you, maybe we should hurry up and start optimizing for LLMs and look into what we can do to speak to bots more effectively, workflows and everything. But that's definitely a very loaded topic.
Yeah, well, we didn't want to run out of, things that we'd have to figure out here over the next few years. So at least we're safe. Plenty of things to
It's
work on.
good to be a marketer. It's good to be a marketer, definitely. Well, Scott, thank you so very much. This was enlightening. This was an amazing conversation. I appreciate all of your insights, and I look forward to the next State of MarTech report. I really am. And maybe I will take it to a baseball game. Maybe I'll sit by the fire and read it, but I love those.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Nadia.